The night was clear enough to make sound travel farther, so each sleigh bell felt like a star that had learned how to ring. Cold sharpened the edges of the roofs and taught the chimneys to breathe neatly. The reindeer shook frost from their whiskers and pretended not to enjoy the way the air tasted like peppermint and pine. I tipped the reins and we skimmed the black silk of the sky, and there below us lay a crescent of forest, holding a small town in its arms. In that forest, under a brim of snow, a young fir stood very straight, the way children do when they want to be chosen. I have known that tree since it was as tall as my red boots. I had watched it argue gently with wind and welcome finches like small green doorways welcome laughter. It had practiced making shadows at noon and catching moonlight at midnight. The forest is a school that never rings the bell for dismissal, and the fir was an attentive pupil. Yet it was also impatient, which is a common flaw in brave hearts. The taller pines leaned into weather with old wisdom. But this one stretched a little too eagerly and asked the winter sky questions it could have asked the earth. What it wanted most was to matter in a way it could see. It wanted strings of light. It wanted ribbons to hold and children to count its branches. It wanted to be the center of a room that had stories in it. Trees are not superior to people in this regard. We all want proof. I brought the sleigh down among the trunks where the snow kept secrets and the hair tracks wrote polite notes. I stepped to the fir and laid a glove on its bark. Easy, I said, in the language trees understand, which is mostly patience spoken aloud. The fir trembled, whether from cold or from being noticed, and the needles replied with a sound like the softest applause. Down in the town, the lanterns were gathering. A committee had decided, as committees do, that a fine tall tree should stand in the square, and children had already begun to argue over which place on the string the blue bulb should hold. There was talk of saws and ropes and respectful stumps. The forest listened. It always does when people begin planning what the forest ought to give. The older pines looked toward the mountain, as if to say, "We have done this before, and we will do it again." And the small fir drew itself taller and thought, "Perhaps this year I will be worth a song." I could have let the tale run as it has so many times, and the town would have had a magnificent tree, and a stump would have learned to tell stories to ants. There is honor even in that ending. Firewood keeps more hearts alive than speeches do. But I remembered how the fir had practiced moonlight, and I decided the tale could take another path. I climbed back into the sleigh and made a very small adjustment to the night, the way a musician nudges a tuning peg. In a certain shop window, a handwritten sign tilted itself so a certain woman would read it on her way home. In the pockets of two men carrying a coil of rope, a question started to itch. Could a tree be borrowed instead of taken? In the pages of a gardener's almanac, a bookmark stood up straight where advice about planting after frost waited politely. Then I went on with the deliveries, because the world asks many things at once. When I circled back, the square was a bouquet of breath and mittened hands. The committee had voted for a noble giant from the North Ridge, and their ropes looked confident. But the woman from the window, the one who reads signs that aren't finished arguing with their tape, held up a potted fir outside the hardware store. It stood no taller than she did, which was not very tall, and its root ball sat in a wooden tub someone had sanded as if it were a cradle. Children drifted toward it the way moths drift toward porch lamps. "We could choose this one," she said, "not to defeat anyone, but to open a new door. We could give it lights and songs this year. We could plant it in the schoolyard come spring. We could let it learn children's names for years and years. We could have a tree that remembers us." Voices tried positions the way chess pieces try squares. The ropemen looked at the mountain and then at the tub, and then at their own boots, which are very honest judges. The gardener cleared his throat and quoted his bookmark. The baker, who has opinions about everything that rises, declared that traditions are best when they grow. Someone scoffed at the little fur's size, but the children did not. Children respect small things that try. The vote was quick and clean and kind. The big ropes stayed coiled. The tub received a procession. The little fur, who would have blushed if bark could, rode slowly into town on a sled, borrowed from a boy proud to be useful. The committee wrote temporary on the schedule with a pencil and underlined planting day with a certainty that surprised even them. I walked with them unseen, which is a trick I am allowed. The fur craned to watch the roofs pass, and the windows dressed themselves in faces. A dog trotted alongside as if it had been hired. At the square, ladders leaned, and the first string of lights lifted like a new constellation's learning its lines. Hands were careful. Needles drank the cold and turned it into perfume. When the switch was thrown, the little fur did not turn into anything else. It simply revealed what it had always prepared to be, a host. Children began the ancient math of ornament spacing. Mothers adjusted and then pretended they had not. Fathers made those small, proud sounds they make when twine behaves. A grandparent hung a paper star that had been folded on a year when hope had been thinner and decided to thicken again just then. Someone sang a note not quite on key, and the square moved toward the note so it would not be lonely. The fur held all this without complaint and without boasting. Trees are good at holding. All night I visited one roof and another, while the square churned gently with cocoa and agreements. Each time I glided past, I checked that the little fur's lights did not tangle with the wind. I'm not above helping with knots. At one turn, I found the fur speaking the way trees speak when joy surprises them. Not with words, but with that small shiver that moves through every needle at once. I am seen, it said to the stars. The stars answered that they were pleased for it. You should know what happened in the forest. Dawn found the older pines standing exactly as they had stood the day before, and yet quieter, which is a humility even the tall must practice. A jay told the groves what the town had done, because jays enjoy being first with news. Wind carried the story from ridge to ridge, and some trunks clicked softly, which is a forest's version of applause. The stump that would have been did other good work instead. Snow rested on it and kept a vole alive through a rough noon. And in spring it would host mushrooms that translate decay into food. There are many ways to be necessary. Winter continued like a steady drum under a song. The fur learned town weather, how chimneys shed heat with kindness, how footsteps make paths that pretend to be decisions, how sparrows hold counsel on telegraph wires and never come to harm for it. More importantly, it learned names. Children named after grandmothers, children named after rivers, children who arrived last year and still translated their laughter from another language. It learned the baker's habit of giving away the first loaf and the constable's habit of whistling a tune no one could identify, and the librarian's habit of turning pages more quietly when readers were very young. If you think a tree cannot learn such things, you have not watched one stand near a school long enough. I kept an eye on the tub's soil. It froze and thawed on its own schedule, but roots are good at waiting. When the deep cold had done its duty and stepped aside, the gardener ran a line of twine from a south fence to a north dream and staked out a square of earth beside the swings. Children crowded around, armed with questions and small shovels that made more enthusiasm than holes. We rolled the fur gently, stripped the tub like a shell, and lowered the tree into the ground. Earth tucked itself around roots like a blanket around tired shoulders. A girl patted the last spadeful smooth, with the authority of a queen who had not yet learned how to curtsy and did not need to. Spring performed its slow music, buds rehearsed, rain performed its kind arithmetic. The fur discovered worms are neighbors, and that the morning L from the school is not an enemy, but a friend that keeps promises. The first recess brought a ring of children. They tried leaning against the trunk and found support. They tried skipping close and found a new rule. No one trips who's looking where they are going. They hung a small tin chime on a low branch, and the breeze learned to play it without bragging. Years rolled as steady as the wheels on a well-made toy. The fir kept a careful ledger of seasons. It hosted winter's sparrows when roofs were too slick, and summer's shade when swings had made the air hot. It learned to wear snow like a queen's mantle, and sunlight like a champion's sash. It grew past shoulders, past hats, past ladders. The town grew too, in the way good towns do. Wider welcome, fewer lonely corners, more names at the table. Some of the children who had argued about blue bulbs became teachers and argued about punctuation, which is an honorable evolution. Some who had tugged the first ropes learned to hold babies with the same concentration, and some who had hung the paper star learned to mend it each year just enough. And so every December, the square strung its lights on the living tree by the swings. Children fetched the boxes from the closet beside the gym. Someone always remembered the tin chime and hung it higher. Not to hide it, but to let wind say hello to more branches. Lanterns stood around the roots like sentries that happened to be friendly. Songs gathered as easily as breath. No saw sang. Instead, shovels broke a little frost to make room for 3 sprigs of wintergreen set near the trunk, because the librarian insisted stories need companions. Through it all, I kept my rounds. I could not claim the town on any map. There are many such towns and many such trees. But the fir and I kept our habit. I would pass, and it would shiver a greeting up its spine, and I would let a few flakes find it first as a compliment. Some years were easy. Some years made the lights feel heavier. Once, a storm creased the tallest bough like an old letter. The gardener bound it gently, and the fir learned that broken does not mean finished. Once, a summer of heat made the needles doubt. A boy came every other day with 2 buckets and a grin made of stubbornness. And the fir discovered that resilience sometimes arrives wearing sneakers. Not every place can plant, not every season allows borrowing. I know. I have stood over stumps that were sacrificial and worth it. I have watched winter nights lit by a felled giant with the kind of solemn gratitude that keeps me quiet. I am not a scolder. I am a keeper of options. This tale only says that one small tree wanted to matter and learned how, not by being perfect or tallest, but by staying and knowing the names of those who needed shade. What did the fir think of its original wish for ribbons and roomfuls? It got them and more. It learned that being the center of a moment is pleasant, and being the center of a place is purpose. Ribbons come and go, names return. One year, I arrived late because a northern gale had opinions. The square was already bright, but the first song had not begun. The town had made a new custom. Before the switch, a child would step forward and tell the tree one hope for the coming year. Nothing grand. Small, honest hopes that trees understand. Granddad's cough quieter. More friends for the new kids. A swing seat that doesn't pinch. The fir listened the way good elders listen. Light rose from the needles before any hand touched the switch. And I swear, the tin chime sounded like agreement. That night, I tucked a little gift beneath the low boughs. A wooden plaque no bigger than a book, engraved with words that would dry well in weather. The gardener found it in the morning and fixed it to a stake. It said, "We chose to grow with this tree. Please remember to choose again." People read it and smiled, and some pretended not to wipe their eyes. The fir did not need the words. Trees remember with rings. The sign was for the ringless among us. I am old enough to be patient and impatient enough to keep working. I will tell you what I learned again from the fir. The world likes to hurry you into being important in visible ways. It will applaud your height and count your lights. There is nothing wrong with lights, but the better arithmetic happens under the snow, where roots practice their faith. When you cannot see the proof, that is often when the most proof is being prepared. The fir did not become admirable by being chosen. It was chosen because it had been quietly admirable for years. Perhaps you live where a square is not available, or committees speak too loudly, or the ground is stingy with planting. Then borrow the lesson, if not the method. Tie your lights to what will outlast the evening. Teach your celebrations to remember faces, not only ornaments. Spend your energy where it can come back with friends. When you must take, take respectfully and give back in kind. When you can plant, plant and water more often than you feel like. When someone small stands up very straight, leaping to be chosen, notice and give them work that matters. By the time I turned the sleigh toward the long road home, the square's glow had softened into that steady kindness that keeps rooftops from feeling lonely. The fir's lights blinked their modest rhythm. Wind tested the tin chime and decided to leave it be. The school bells slept, and the swings made their small winter complaints to the cold. I left footprints between two roofs, just for the pleasure of puzzling a pair of cousins in the morning. The reindeer tossed their antlers as if to crown the town briefly, and then let it keep the crown. I will see the fir again. Trees and I keep appointments that weather cannot cancel. It will be taller and wiser, and I will be exactly as old as I need to be. I will bring a ribbon for a child to find tangled just low enough to be a victory. I will read the plaque and nod to my own advice. I will press a glove to the bark and feel beneath my hand the slow, faithful thunder of sap on the move, which is how trees say, "We are still working." Carry that with you into your morning. Grow where you are planted if you can. Be planted where you grow if you must. Stand for others. Learn their names. Practice moonlight. When the time comes to shine, do it gently and for company. And if you are very impatient tonight, as the small fir once was, try my simplest counsel. Make roots first. The lights will find you in their proper season.